Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? Fairly well. Hopefully, yesterday's insight provided some analysis that kind of was maybe opaque at best, so you can better internally gauge different types of macro geopolitical factors and outcomes, which is what this is all about. But moving away from that and the Israeli value statecraft, I'd like to talk about Governor Cuomo, Time Warner Inc., the merger, and Randall Stevenson, Jeffrey Butkus, Chris Cuomo, Cynthia Nixon, and the federal illusion of choice. As everyone knows, I am running for governor for the state of New York, or if you don't know, now you do. And that is for a few reasons. More prominently, I'd like to represent New York in creating the first self-sustainable city ever in the world, resolving our some $65 billion in debt. And if you go through my websites and the links to my websites and the solutions, you'll be able to see a solution there called Quantum Tracks, which essentially converts the compression from trains into energy. Quite a bit of energy if you have all those subways, right, and all those rails. So the next step in the evolution of travel is creating energy through the compression of the train over the track, and hopefully people, voters, can see the potential with that. Now, it's important to note that with respect to the situation politically and with respect to the merger as well. So let me go over a little bit of that. So my company, G1 Quantum Clean Energy Company, just under 100 people internationally, just closing out litigation to become established. But that's kind of difficult to do if there's a value type of undercurrent lingering on from September 11, 2001. And more notably, Governor Cuomo in particular has taken an extrajudicial type of attention to different types of outstanding civil suits, criminality as well, covering up billions of dollars in energy price fixing, commodity market manipulation, wire fraud, wire drag nets, etc. So what would I like to speak about that? Let's first cover the merger. For about 7 years now, I've been trying to put energy project sales and different types of deals together. And Time Warner Inc., CNN in particular, through Jeffrey Butkus, Jeff Zucker, Walton before Zucker, has sat there and interfered every step of the way, abusing provisions set aside for journalism. And this has put myself into somewhat of a trying circumstance, respective of, like I said, the lingering 9/11 value versus growth circumstance, where Warren Buffett wanted David Alger murdered and did so through improperly formed monopoly Berkshire Hathaway. And when you begin to put all those types of factors together, you can see that when you go back and look at the appeal that was filed in relation to Time Warner Inc., Nicole Lapin, you'll see that Jeffrey Butkus, in desperation, fraudulently moves to sell Time Warner Inc. in its entirety to AT&T after I exposed additional criminality, shadow accounting criminality, violation of U.S. economic sanctions in Venezuela. It's Justice Leon is currently presiding over, where I've filed numerous documents with the D.C. court presiding over the United States versus AT&T, Time Warner Inc., DirecTV. Now, a particular nuance of that is that the DOJ wants to limit the scope of the prosecution, even though I'm freely offering to provide deposition substantiating the type of criminality that has been ongoing. Now, it's important to to note that, because as we move forward, um, it'll become apparent with respect to Jamie Dimon, Nicole Lapin, the value criminal undercurrent, that things with respect to criminality and prejudice have, not been fair, and I haven't been able to get justice for now 7 years, predicated on 17, going back to September 11, 2001. And what do I mean by that? So you have Time Warner Inc. that's being managed by an executive construct, Jeffrey Bucas, Jeff Zucker, like I said, Walton before him, and different types of executive value constructs that execute wire dragnets. And then essentially, to get away with that criminality, they sit next to the governor, people controlling the judiciary and the legal apparatus in New York, and can essentially get away with wire dragnets with the intent to entrap and murder, similarly to California and the Governor Brown type of issue with respect to the ongoing social media, value media, psychological manipulation issues that they're having there. And this, alongside with Chris Cuomo working there, creates an interesting type of condition or context where you have, like I said, wire dragnets moving asymmetrically relative to my data, blocking billions of dollars of energy project sales, and no accountability. Why isn't there any accountability? Because when you have to deal, it seems like when you have to deal with the reality of the situation, with me coming to the table with solutions, quantum tracks, putting G1 Quantum, in a decent type of valuation categorically, it becomes almost like a sense of denial that kind of persists, and you have different types of wire fraud, wire dragnets that fail, and obviously that's resulted in numerous FBI agents leaving the FBI, and resignations of 2 directors of the FBI, arguably attributed to 2 resignations of directors of the FBI and a deputy director. And why is this all happening? And let's get into that. You have a Southampton type of Mueller Manafort construct where you're funneling money into different types of political campaigns for 2016 and 2018, ahead of the 2018 election, which essentially buys up different types of Deflategate, Daniels, different types of value narratives to be able to execute different types of wire dragnets, and again create a psychologically distressing type of environment, which obviously takes a different type of strategy to sidestep and expose and essentially trap and minimize, which I do execute successfully. It's just that you have different types of campaign contribution violations that, when Mueller is talking about Southampton, and you have Robert Gates, you have Paul Manafort, and that type of construct, they're essentially paying off different types of individuals, executives at different types of media outlets to be able to then perpetuate false narratives and different types of rigged types of controlled arguments, like you see in the Middle East to an extent, like I exposed yesterday, to then execute a variety of wire fraud criminality, which is nonviolent, and essentially with the governor sitting there condoning it in a Jerry Brown-like posture, Governor Cuomo, the issues are never addressed. And even when it takes a violent context, the issues still aren't being addressed. So you have, on one hand, my company, G1 Quantum, where we're coming to the table with these solutions, turning border wall projects that are $30 billion upside down, right side up, $261 billion in its first year of operation. And you have liability owed to our company by Time Warner Inc., Jeffrey Bucas, abusing provisions set aside for journalism to execute this wire fraud. And it's not just that, it's that we're not only owed the liability, G1 Quantum, but we're rightfully entitled to take over Time Warner Inc. against the backdrop of that criminality. Does that make sense? When you're executing criminality beyond your ability to repay, what does that do to the company? It makes it insolvent, right? So, and rather than Chapter 11 bankruptcy, rightfully allowing us to transition the company from a wire fraud based business model, the criminality that it's, kind of synonymous for, transfer that business model to clean energy and supplement its traditional brands from there. So hopefully Justice Leon can, understand that and interpret that to an extent, but you have to understand that my faith isn't really placed into him wholeheartedly, or the Department of Justice, with the narrowing of the scope of the prosecution, and me having to, submit paperwork and also, kind of follow up with people when I shouldn't really have to follow up, and when I've already paid my dues and helped the DOJ collect tens of billions of dollars against JP Morgan Chase and related shadow banking, insider trading entities, right? And it just becomes a matter of, okay, well, what's the liability owed? Who has the best path forward for the company? And without a doubt, hands down, with respect to the solutions outlined, I feel like I meet that mark. But you have to understand the political nuance that interplays with that, right? You have the campaign contribution violations, different types of value criminality originating out of Southampton, different types of fundraisers, and different types of things in 2016 to then perpetuate or execute different types of narratives that have persisted into 2018, which have failed every step of the way. And now Mueller is caught in between a rock and a hard place with respect to that, because you have that type of Bukis, Chris Cuomo, Governor Cuomo construct that now Bukis sees that as being marginalized with the DOJ's action blocking the merger. So he then federally redirects with Cynthia Nixon running for governor to better control and create the value illusion of choice for the people of New York, right? When essentially Cynthia Nixon has no solutions or policy whatsoever to be able to shape New York, or state of New York, into a type of cash positive construct where, where we become a model of all cities around the world. And that's essentially what I do, despite all the types of layers, multi-layers of value fraud, wire dragnets, and different types of criminality blocking energy project sales. And, these are things that I'd like you to understand, is that when you see the AT&T, DirecTV, Time Warner Inc. merger, you see that it's been blocked by the Department of Justice. There's quite more to that than meets the eye. That the value media, the same value media that presented the public a false choice on the border wall, doesn't want the public to know, right? So when someone's coming in that's owed around $85 to $100 billion in blocked energy project sales, and they're redirecting with a merger $85 billion to cover up that criminality owed to me, and then cover up the shadow accounting practices by Ernst & Young, where Randall Stevenson's best friend was CEO Ernst & Young. You have these competing type of conflicting undercurrents, where the value construct within the DOJ doesn't necessarily want to recognize my entitlement to Time Warner Inc. and to transition it to Quantum Corporation. So I really have to put in the groundwork for that, which I do, respective of the solutions laid out. And hopefully not only Quantum Tracks, but the other solutions, the other type of introspective analysis warrant my my posture, where I've gotten to be, where I am with that transition in the company. Hopefully it warrants further consideration. So that's where we find ourselves with that, is that you have now, as the governor race, the race for governor of the state of New York begins to intensify, you'll see a value protectionist federal construct that does not wish to debate any types of nuance pertaining to the solutions outlined or the criminality outlined and which is subject to Robert Mueller's investigation of Southampton funneling money, which you have different types of competing value narratives and constructs that um, seem that need to be unearthed to a more broader extent through the Federal Election Commission. And the paperwork on my end will be submitted to the Federal Election Commission, which it already has been, outlining the layers of criminality reaching the Federal Energy Commission, SEC. Obviously, like I said, fraudulent campaign contributions and value criminality derived out of that nexus or conspiracy out in Southampton, right? So when you begin to see that and be able to break down the criminality respective to the merger, you see that AT&T and their posture, funneling money to Michael Cohen and other types of criminality. Obviously, their claim to Time Warner Inc. should not warrant any further consideration respective to the circumstances pertaining to that, right? So hopefully you can see that you have Governor Cuomo, you have Chris Cuomo at CNN, and then because Bukis is getting some friction from the DOJ and pushback, you have him then again having Cynthia Nixon, Sex and the City, who's on his payroll already, then redirecting to better control the value narrative, because that's what Jeffrey Bukis does. He's not an innovator. He's someone that can create different types of fictional narratives to try to talk around different types of criminal situations. So I feel like his time is coming to an end. But again, I'm just making sure everyone understands the layers of the criminality. You have, at first, liability owed to my company, G1 Quantum, for cell phone hacking, computer tampering, wire fraud. Moving asymmetrically relative to my data blocking billions of dollars energy project sales. And then from there, you have the origination of a fraudulent merger proposed by Randall Stevenson at AT&T, DirecTV, to cover up multi-billion-dollar shadow accounting fraud in Venezuela, perpetrated by his best friend from Ernst & Young, which Jeffrey Bukis plays along because it saves him some $85 to $100 billion in liability owed to me. And then you have the DOJ limiting the scope of the prosecution to try to get away with the criminality. And all within that, you have Governor Cuomo essentially looking the other way in the wire dragnets and criminality perpetrated by journalists, abusing provisions set aside for journalism to execute wire fraud. And I'm not saying that, the employees are necessarily mostly responsible. I'm just saying that Jeffrey Bukis is then delegating these criminal tasks through Jeff Zucker, where they're then executed, CNN, other types of means. And this is true News Corp, Murdoch, true Bloomberg News, Michael Bloomberg. These are all different types of, now after 7 years, these become value type of habits that, are criminal. So you have to understand it from that point of view is, okay, where does this investigation of Robert Mueller go? Why all of a sudden Wall Street Journal not wanting to hear any more of the investigation? And that's because obviously the governor, the election for governor for the state of New York are coming around the corner, and Jeffrey Bukis would, and that type of value construct would like to limit the scope of the dialogue around that to try to create conditions for Governor Cuomo to get away with wire fraud, wire dragnets, different types of criminality, energy price fixing, commodity market manipulation, and presenting the public a false choice on not only the border wall, but also quantum tracks and turning New York State some $65 billion in debt right side up. So hopefully everyone can see how those things all interplay. And at the end of the day, I feel like once you see the criminality, the liability owed, and the solution I set forward, leading the company forward in its transition to Quantum Corporation, that my efforts warrant further consideration with respect to that. So with that, hopefully I covered most, if not all, aspects of that, and I will leave you for this evening.